Hello, and thank you for joining me today as we continue our discussion on the nervous system. And today we're going to talk specifically about nerves. So we talked about a little bit with the systems and what's controlled, but each of those is controlled by smaller pieces called nerves. So each of these nerves is made of three pieces. First, you have a body, which is where your nucleus is located. So for example, in this cell, this is our body, which is the big portion. You have what's called an axon. An axon is the tail portion, and there's different types of nerves which we're going to talk about, but this is an axon here, which delivers your impulse. This is where the impulse gets delivered, so it's released down here on these axon terminals, which transmits signals. Those signals are then picked up by what's called the dendrites. So all of these little branches out here are your dendrites. So these are the dendrites that pick up the signal from the axon. So the signal kind of runs this way. It goes from your dendrites to your body. Your body picks up and says, okay, that's enough signal to pass it. It goes down the axon and gets released down here to the next cell. In between your nerve cells, so funny enough, your nerve cells don't actually touch. No two nerves are actually connected. There's a small little gap, or a synapse, which is a space between your nerve cells. So this diagram here is showing you have an axon terminal or synaptic knob of one nerve, and you have your receptor sites on your dendrites of your next nerve. This gap is very small, but it is there. And so what covers that, or what penetrates that, is these axon terminals release these little particles which are called neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are chemicals that carry information across your synapse, across this gap. So these are chemicals that pass across, they get picked up here at the receptor sites, and if enough of them get picked up, they get sent to the body and then down the axon to the next synaptic terminal here. This gaps is called a synapse, or it's called a synaptic cleft, or synaptic gap, which is just a space between the axon and the dendrite of different nerve cells. So this is one nerve cell, so we'll call this nerve cell 1, and this dendrite is to nerve cell 2, and so it's being passed along that way. Along with having nerves, you have different types of nerves. So there's two different types of nerves. One of them is called a motor nerve. Typically, your motor nerves start in the brain. Your brain comes up with, hey, you should do this, and the motor allows your car to do things. Your motor nerves allow your body to do things. So they usually start in the brain, and they end down here at your effectors, whether it's a muscle, a gland, or a different portion of the body, but something that happens, something does something. On the flip side, you have sensory nerves. So motor nerves start in the brain, end at your effectors, whether it's your muscle, your gland, or what have you. Your sensory nerves usually start in the periphery, so they start with your body, your senses, and they end at your brain. So this is where your 5 senses come in. So hearing is a sense, that's your periphery. Your ears are on the outside. They send the signal to your brain. Vision, your sight, is in the periphery, it goes to your brain. Touch, again, starts in the periphery, goes to the brain. Taste and sound is all the same thing. Okay, I guess I said sound once. Touch, taste, sight, feeling, and hearing. Yeah. So the sensation information is received depends on the part of the brain stimulated. So we have information that gets sent to the brain, and then it gets sent to a specific region to be transcribed or to be decoded on what it is. So if your nerves get mixed up and send a message to different parts of the brain, your experience is totally different. So if you get a signal from your eyes that doesn't get sent to your vision center, you're not going to have a clue what that means. So if your nerves get mixed up, your experience would be totally different. So we have two types of nerves. We have motor nerves and we have sensory nerves. And then in between those two, we have this thing called an interneuron, which transmits impulses between two nerves, such as in the brain. So you have an interneuron which goes here. So your sensory nerves conduct impulses from the outside and send it to your brain. Your interneuron then gets that signal and figures out where to go with it and takes it to a motor neuron which goes from the brain to the rest of your body. Your nerves in the periphery have this thing called this insulation to them. So your central nervous system, your spinal cord and brain is covered with your meninges. That's kind of their protective covering. Your sensory nerves, your peripheral nervous system, are covered with insulation to increase the speed of the impulse. This insulation is called myelin. Myelin is like a protective coating. So think of a copper wire in a house. You have the wire here, a thicker line. You have your wire here, and then outside that wire, you have your rubber tubing. The myelin acts like the rubber tubing, which just it directs your signal in the proper direction. It makes things run smoothly, prevents any interference. So this is your axon, which is covered in myelin, which is just a protective coating. So this is another one showing you the myelin on the nerves. We have these nodes of Ranvier, which are gaps in the myelin, which are important because they allow your nerve to recharge or repolarize, which we're going to talk about. But the myelin it really speeds this impulse up. It concentrates your repolarization here, so your axon can repolarize really quick, and then it skips a bunch of different repolarization sites, so a bunch of them are covered with the myelin, and it just makes things move much quicker. Your nerves can actually regenerate, so they're not, once you kill a nerve, it's not completely dead, or once you damage a nerve, it's not completely gone. You can have repair happen to a damaged nerve, so they can't divide. So your nerve cells do not undergo mitosis. They don't split, they don't make more nerves. The only way that new connections happen is through growing your nerves and finding different connections to other nerves. That's how we increase our memory. That's how we learn new things, is you build connections, but you don't actually make new nerves. If you have a damaged axon, if your axon is damaged, you can get a new axon to grow and replace the other one, and you can have connections reoccur. So they can grow, but they can't divide themselves. If you do end up killing a nerve, so Peyton Manning is an example of this. He had a damage in his arm, and over time he got his feeling back and is now fully functioning, has everything back that he had before. But that's an example of he damaged an axon, and then his axons were able to regrow and replace the damaged one. So they were able to fill in the gap that was left by the damaged axon. If you end up killing a nerve, you can have a new nerve that rewires itself and replaces the role of the killed nerve. So this is building those connections, rewiring it to build a different connection, so that the process can keep going and you're unaffected or unimpeded by the damage. So here's an example. You have cell bodies here. So the center of the neuron over here on this side, and then the axon runs this way. If you damage your axon at this point, so there's no longer a connection here, you have Schwann cells, which produce the myelin, which can help to regenerate this axon, regenerate this space. Over time, you send nutrients down, you send everything that's needed, and over time this gap is bridged by an axon regrowing, and that signal is then again able to pass through here, and so all of this takes place. So if you have damage here, this portion of the nerve is going to die because there's nothing to supply it with nutrients. So again, this portion here, the distal portion closest to your muscle cell, is broken down, and those parts are reused. Your Schwann cells then degenerate and break down, which you're seeing here. They're falling apart, and then this axon regrows. As it regrows, once it finally gets to where it's reconnected, those Schwann cells can take over, cover it in myelin, and you can get your signal to continue to pass through. We're going to pause here. So this is kind of the first section. You should be able to answer questions 1 through 6 here. And then in the next video, we'll talk about questions 7 through 12. You'll be able to answer those as well.